Hello, my name is Reem Abbas. I'm a Sudanese journalist and researcher. I think the war is largely on civilians, but it is also largely on women. And we have seen women bear the brunt of the conflict when it comes to displacement. The majority of the internally displaced persons are women and children. And of course, women were subjected to horrendous levels of sexual violence, sexual and gender-based violence, um, from kidnappings, rape. Women are being basically sold in markets. They are being sold as sex slaves. They are being kept by the militia, the Rapid Support Forces militia, as sex slaves. They were kidnapped from their families' homes, and their families were asked for ransom. Women really became very victimized by this war, bearing the brunt of it and bearing the brunt of the violence. Many of them lost their jobs, and then when they had to flee to other places, they had to work menial jobs, making very little income just to support their families. There is very little humanitarian aid in Sudan right now, so the women have to make things work by just going outside and trying to do whatever it takes to support their families. Making them very vulnerable to exploitation, making them very vulnerable to all kinds of violence. We're also seeing rising violence in the public spaces, rising violence in the private spaces. Um, we are also seeing, because of course, right now, the problems with electricity and with the telecommunication lines. So women are cut off from, their phones, from internet and so on. So it's also very difficult to get access to information and to get access to victims of violence. It is a terrible situation for the women of Sudan right now. Mm, I think already the civic space in Sudan was under threat before the war. And as a result of the war, of course, women human rights defenders were not only dealing with a shrinking civic space, but also they were dealing with problems because they were also, victims. They were also IDPs. They had to flee their homes. What we saw is that a lot of the women human rights defenders in Sudan are, middle class women who are able to move, who are able to kind of do this kind of work because also a lot of it is done based on their time, and a lot of it is volunteer. So right now, this segment, I would say, is now struggling because they're also displaced. They have also lost their homes. They have also lost their jobs and income. So right now, they are also becoming vulnerable, and they're also becoming impoverished. So it's very difficult for them to continue working at the same pace as before. So what we're seeing is right now, there's just, other than, like I said, the shrinking space where there are concerns and security concerns. And we have seen women, for example, getting arrested after doing a protest against the war in Blue Nile. And we have seen some activities get canceled, because of course there is a war. So there's an emergency kind of law situation. But I think what's going to continue happening is that the women who were doing this kind of work on their own time with their own, resources will be unable to do so for a long time as they personally recover the losses that they have endured. I think a lot of networking, so I think um, women human rights groups were so resilient in the sense that they were able to kind of start new groups, or they were able to continue working from even their locations of displacement. So, for example, after the war in Khartoum, we saw many women groups get active in Kassala in Eastern Sudan and in Al Jazeera in like Central Sudan. So we saw how they were able to adapt and how they were able to move to a new place. And even during this very difficult situation of displacement, they were able to kind of continue working. And this is because, and this is one of the benefits of the 2009 revolution, even though it has failed, of course, to accomplish so many things. But what we saw is that in the aftermath of the revolution, a lot of the women's movement, I would say, was decentralized. So we had a lot of smaller groups kind of popping up in different places. this infrastructure, where, of like just hundreds of like, small feminist or women's groups, popping up in different places around Sudan, was instrumental to kind of helping women continue this kind of work. So they were able to, even the women that were displaced, they were able to go and kind of benefit from this infrastructure and continue working. So I would say a lot of coordination, a lot of benefiting from the infrastructure that was built as a result of the 2019 revolution, and also because there were existing networks that were able to continue kind of supporting and like funding and providing kind of um opportunities to kind of meet and network and so on, such as like SIHA network and so on. So I think there were opportunities, women took advantage of them, and they continue to take advantage of them. There are many examples. So we saw, for example, in Kassala, the women's platform was able to kind of not only continue working on women's issue, but they were able to kind of start advocating for, women who were displaced. And they were able to also kind of coordinate and announce for little initiatives that were supporting displaced communities, especially women. We saw, for example, SIHA Network, which is a regional network, but that has a presence in Sudan, continue to kind of support its women's networks around Sudan. So they have like gender equality networks that kind of document abuses and violations and that kind of give women a platform to do advocacy. So they were able to continue doing that. And we also saw like other groups such as Saura, for example, which is Sudanese Women's. I think like it's an organization that works on documentation. They continue to document and they continue to kind of do advocacy. And also we saw the government entity, which is called a Unit on Combating Violence Against Women, become very active in documenting and also issuing statements on sexual violence against women. And this is a government entity, so usually they would be very reserved, but because they have a very strong kind of head, they were able to issue statements on sexual violence, especially at the hands of the militia, and kind of really just rally support, for the victims and ensure that this is not missed and this becomes kind of a vital component of the case, against the war. So we saw so many like, big groups and initiatives and different bodies that are instrumental in doing this kind of work. Right now, because of the conflict, its protection is very precarious, right? Because um, you have basically hundreds of thousands of people in IDP camps, or not camps, but like staying in schools and staying in places that are not homes, So a lot of violations are happening. And also right now you have women living in places that are no longer kind of controlled by the state or the army. So the different functions or structures that should operate, such as the police, the courts, are no longer there, right? They're no longer functioning. So it is a very precarious situation. So I think right now, the way forward is to ensure that the locations that are safe and that are under the control of the state should ensure that the courts, the police stations, and all the different, legal kind of and judicial institutions are operational, you know. And the second thing is to ensure that we continue documenting the cases of women, especially the women that are victims in the militia areas, to ensure that at some point we bring them justice. I mean, I think when it comes to women human rights defenders, I think the first step would be to empower kind of the existing groups that are meant to do this kind of work. So, for example, there is the Female Journalists Network. There's also different groups such as, MANSAM, Women in Civic and Political, groups, Sudanese Women in Civic and Political Groups. There's No to Women's Oppression. There's the Sudanese Women's Union. So there are other kind of, and also there are other networks that are doing this kind of work. So the best thing is to empower them, to enable to do this kind of work. There's a lot of problems when it comes to resources and a lot of problems when it comes to the human resources, because like I said, people are displaced, women are struggling. So having this kind of human resource that can do this kind of work is really a struggle right now. So they need to be empowered, they need to have opportunities, they need to have at least some kind of resources to do this kind of work. And also, I think doing more advocacy at the state level, ensuring that the government understand or the authorities understand the kind of concerns that women have, especially women activists, and that they are given some kind of protection and ensuring that this conversation is happening at the highest levels of the authorities. I think WHRD, MENA, and others are doing great work, and I think giving them a platform would be the first thing. So making sure that they're given a platform to speak at regional, conversations, regional media, webinars, or different events, because we do need to have a space to kind of share our story. And also, I would say making sure that making sure that they're also able to kind of help us network with other countries where women face the same difficult, circumstances, so that we're able to kind of understand how they were able to use platforms, how they were able to call for justice, and how they were able to kind of be part in developing mechanisms to protect women. So I think having this like exchange programs and so on, and of course giving us a platform to speak would be the first step. And I think so far many regional networks have been doing that, and I really want to thank them for that. I think when I talk about resources, I also have reservations, right? Because I have reservations about like ensuring that I don't really challenge the local mechanisms that are happening right now, because right now we have a lot of grassroots kind of community-led initiatives, right? So I don't want to disrupt the community-led initiatives. But at the same time, I do understand that there's so many things that we need, right? And I do understand that basically we have to make sure that a lot that more aid is also coming to women. So I think there are two levels, right? There is the level of humanitarian aid where there are thousands of families in schools and in the open and staying in very uncomfortable situations and very unhygienic situations, right, in different parts of Sudan. And they are displaced and they have nowhere to go, and they literally have no livelihoods, they have no jobs anymore, no income generating activities, and they are completely destitute. So they need to be supported, because we are talking about women that need this kind of support so that they don't, become exploited, for example. So they need to be supported through humanitarian aid. And then you have another level of like activists and journalists and so on who need psychosocial support, who might need relocation if they don't feel safe, who need work to continue their work because many of them have lost their jobs and they do such critical work that needs this kind of funding. So like I said, support, like make sure that we recognize that the community has been doing a great job in kind of mobilizing resources and ensuring that people contribute, in general. But also, I think there are, like I said, so many needs because what we're doing is just not enough because the crisis is beyond us. I think the first thing is to give women a platform at different conferences and events, make sure that we're able to have our voices heard. The second is to make sure that, you are supporting us on social media to get our voices across. So the main hashtag is Keep Eyes on Sudan. Use it, follow the people that are spreading the word, follow the people that continue to um, really send our messages and get our voices across, amplify their voices, okay? And the third thing is to always understand that there's a deep story behind conflicts and that we cannot simplify it, right? And we all cannot be guilty of like simplifying the situation because otherwise we're not going to find solutions. The last thing is uh there are people, we are talking about people that are dying. There are people who have stories, who have lives, who have dreams, so let's also not be caught kind of just belittling, their suffering and just thinking of them as names because they're not names, they are individuals.